welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, at Thundergrunt Bob on all the dumb social media. And right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant, and my Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
Jamie?
I'm Jamie Nash. I'm the writer of Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet workbook. I'm also a screenwriter, and my Twitter handle is Jamie_Nash.
And we're here today to talk about a Godzilla movie for the second time on our show. Is this the second Godzilla movie we did?
Yep.
We're going to talk about Godzilla -1 because it's finally on Netflix. We actually, unlike if you listen to our Dune episode, that was like a fight to get me to do that episode. But if you listen to this episode, we wanted to do this months ago, but it obviously wasn't available. This is like the one we were trying to do so badly instead of arguing over it.
Did all three of us see this in the theater, though?
I did not.
I think
okay.
just me and you did.
Yeah.
I saw it twice. I saw the black and white version too. It was great. So before we get into our talking points, we're going to go around and just say our relationship with this movie or a little mini review. Who wants to go first?
I will.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
The spiel about Godzilla and my own personal history with Godzilla, I did on the last Godzilla episode, so I'm not gonna retread all that. But yeah, I grew up with Godzilla movies. I love Godzilla movies. I've seen most of the Godzilla movies, and I'm actually behind on the more recent ones. And yeah, I love this movie. I love everything about it. I think it's moving. I think it's probably recency bias, but I think it's one of the best scripts craft-wise we've talked about on the show. And I mean, we've got a long list and we're not able to cover everything. We've got a huge list to talk about. We're not even going to talk about all of the craft that's on display. And I love all of the differences in the cultural way a story is told, that it does things that we might not see in an American film from a screenwriting perspective. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about it. So
cool. Jamie?
Yeah, I waited till Netflix. I didn't go to the theater to see it. And everybody, hyped it up so much, and I really liked it. And it was to the point where, honestly, I wasn't sure if I could like a Godzilla movie anymore. Like, I just wasn't sure, because it's been a while since not that I think the ones that recently have come out are bad or anything. They were fine. If they never were made, I'd be happy. If what they are, I watch them. And I'm fine with them. They have some cool fight scenes and stuff like that. I'm digging. But the overall trajectory of the story, I even watched the Apple show that was on, the Monarch show. So I watch them all. As far as my history, because I can't remember what we told, so I'll just say super quick. I did grow up on like Ultraman, Johnny Sokko's Flying Robot, and Godzilla every Saturday. Every Saturday Godzilla was on. Honestly, it's so funny. I watched those Godzilla movies over and over and over again. But if you asked me to pitch the stories of them, I have no idea what was going on. I just remember a bunch of monsters on an island. I remember one time I sought out like Mothra. I watched the movie, and in some ways I can remember that story more. And I remember watching the first Godzilla movie, and I remember that story. But a lot of the ones I watched, the color ones on Saturday with just a lot of monsters fighting each other, I can remember scenes more than stories. Like I have no idea what the engine of those stories were. I just can't remember. But I grew up. I mean, it was kind of like the next level up after Saturday morning cartoons and pro wrestling. It was that. They were like the three things I was watching. So, but yeah. So anyway, I grew up with Godzilla stuff, but I'm not like somebody that knows the ins and outs and the history of it and things like that. There is a part of me that, like in the recent movies, I wondered if Godzilla works for me outside of guys in rubber suits. Like, to me, I like guys in rubber suits, playing the monsters. I like miniature work. Like I'm fascinated by miniature work, and all of that like is kind of the magic of it to me. It's kind of like if you did the Muppets and CGI, I'd be like, I don't know, I don't want the Muppets and I want puppets, you know. So sometimes when I see, this is kind of just my personal take on these things. Sometimes for me, Godzilla is so great because I do love the guys in rubber suits and I love the miniature work and I love that stuff. Um, there's something special and magical to all that that I I think I check out a little more when I see the modern takes when it's computers and digital art.
Which
And
this
that's
is.
why which and
Yeah.
that's why I this one surprised me in that since we've gotten away from rubber suits and miniatures, this is probably the one that I found most compelling story-wise end to end. It held my attention the most since those days of the magic of miniatures. So that's where I'm at. I'm a hard old liner for
Man in
miniatures
suit.
and man in suits. And
Man in
I wish
suit.
I wish they'd come back and make man in suit movies. I really do. I think just on a high level, but that ship
On
is
a,
probably
I,
sailed.
I I don't think on a high level a studio would let that happen, but there'd be joke movies or something where that would happen, you know,
Yeah, like a South Park guys would do it, you know, or something like
or
that.
or if you remember Crank 2, they did a whole Godzilla fight in Crank 2. I don't know if you
Right.
guys remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I could see Del Toro trying to pull something like that
Yeah.
off, you know.
With like a CGI sheen over the puppets or something like that.
Right, right.
I'll say this. Look, I don't need to go into my whole Godzilla history. I love Godzilla. I think over the last 4 years, I've rewatched every era, like because they've been on streaming. I've rewatched all Godzilla in my brain is fresh, but also I would relent to what Jamie said. I don't know if I could tell you if you said a name of the title. I don't know if I could tell you the exact plot because they're usually like political or aliens are forcing the monsters to fight, or there's some kind of environmental disaster, or somebody's controlling Godzilla to attack another nation or something. You know, it's always they're kind of boilerplate what that is. But that's what outside of the first movie, that's what Godzilla is. That's the fabric of Godzilla. That's my argument for why I like some of the newer ones because I'm like they're just the same as what the fabric of Godzilla was before. They're always going to be like that, right? But this one is different. I mean, I'll say this: I cried at this movie. Like when I saw, I'd never expected to cry at a Godzilla movie. I wasn't weeping, but I teared up. And wow, like as someone who in the last 4 years watched, I would say at least 40 Godzilla movies, just in passing because they were all on streaming, and like every night I was like, oh, I'll just try another Godzilla. They didn't make me cry. I really enjoy them and they're awesome and fun and weird as hell. Like a lot of them don't make any sense, but then none of them made me cry. So you know, this movie is definitely this harkens back to the political importance of the first one, while also you know being emotionally resonant enough to make me weep with a movie that has Godzilla in it. So that's pretty impressive by all standards, you know. So that's the fact that I teared up at a Godzilla movie is enough of a review. I don't even need to say much else, right?
I did too. I did.
Yeah,
Too.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
because the point is it doesn't need to be a Godzilla movie. It could be something else. You could call that thing anything, right? And it would work. But it is also a Godzilla movie, and it's great as a Godzilla movie. All right, well, and with that, Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yeah, Takashi Yamazaki. And I don't know. Bob, have you watched any of his other movies? Because he actually
Let me look right now because I didn't
well,
actually look at that.
if you don't know, you probably haven't. But he's done it. I just wondering because this movie is so good. Is his history like really good movies, or is this like he's had so many movies he's done, and they all seem interesting when I look at his filmography.
I have not seen anything he's done. No.
I don't know any of them.
Shame on us.
Yeah, I don't
the
think
same.
I don't think they've risen to like, you know, the United States pop culture scene, so to speak.
Yes.
I think
But
Godzilla is the reason we're seeing it. That's
I
pretty much
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So I'd kind of like to check out the best of his movies
Yeah, definitely.
to see, if they built to this or if there are other ones that are similar. Because he seems like a guy, looking at his history, he started in like miniature work and he worked his way up through all kinds of different filmmaking stuff. And he has 26 movies on his
Wow.
IMDb. Yeah. Um,
For
and they
that,
all
I'd probably go
seem
to
science
Letterboxd to see the
fiction.
highest rated ones and then watch a few of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, some of them are TV series, I guess, in the 26. But tons of work. It wasn't like he's some newbie on the scene or something like that. And honestly, I know very little about him, but I kind of am very curious now. And
And
I
he
don't
was
know.
the VFX supervisor. Like he wrote it,
Yeah,
directed it, and was the VFX.
Yeah.
So it's not
yeah,
just some fluke. I mean, this guy is incredibly talented.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's why I suspect some of his other movies are probably really interesting as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if any of our listeners have any recommendations or where I can find them and where I should check them out. I wouldn't mind checking them out. But that
Yeah. Same
basically
here.
basically what I'm saying is I know very little about him except his Wikipedia. So
Yeah, no, he's also a huge Godzilla fan. I've watched a lot. The
yeah.
one thing I did do is watch a lot of interviews with him, and not for the show. I did it just because I love the movie so much.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
like one of the most significant movies in his life is the original Godzilla. Like,
Okay.
and I feel like he almost bookended it. not that
Yeah.
Godzilla's
Yeah.
not that Godzilla's over, but it feels like he like bookended it with like something that has that much cultural impact. Like, or at
Right.
least that seemed like his goal. And I'm saying that because the next thing is what's different about this Godzilla.
Yeah. And the well, I should also say, and this kind of plugs into that a little bit. This movie made
Oh, right.
115 million worldwide, which so domestically in the U.S. alone, it made 56 million. So it's half of its money came from the U.S. In the box office. And the budget for this thing, what was it? It was super cheap.
15 million.
15. It's insane that it's 15. It's just
That's so much.
I know.
it boggles the mind that this movie
Puts us to shame.
It's also with that budget worth noting that like Toho waited for so long to make another Godzilla after Shin Godzilla because that's considered like
Mhm.
this really important classic movie, right? And they
Mhm.
waited because they didn't ever think they could equal it. Meanwhile, we're making a
Right.
bunch of them, but like they
Yeah.
didn't think they could equal it, so they held off. Not only did they only spend 15 million, but they held off. And
Right.
you know
Right.
what I mean? Like it wasn't. That's how well thought out they are about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, boggles my mind. I mean, it boggles everybody's mind that it was made for so cheap because it looks so good. I
It
mean,
won an Oscar. It's the first time
yeah.
ever for the Godzilla franchise.
And just it has crowd scenes and all this other stuff. It's just kind of amazing. To give you an example, though, so Shin Godzilla made in 2016. So again, I said this movie made $100 and some $1 million, 116 million. Shin made 78 worldwide, so it made less. And get this, Shin's international box office is 76 million. This is why it's so shocking that the US box office is so huge. Because that movie made more money internationally, but it only made $2 million because it probably
It-
barely got a distribution here.
Mhm.
I actually saw it in theaters here. Shin.
You did. You did.
Did you guys? Have you guys seen Shin Godzilla?
I've watched it on Netflix at some point. There was some
So
point when I watched it.
the one thing
Mhm.
I'd say is this: I'm not gonna review that movie or talk about it, but it is less of a crowd pleasing experience. Shin
Yeah.
Godzilla, I think, is a very important movie to to the culture and everything, but it's also not. I don't know. It's not the same type of movie. It's doing something completely else, and it's doing it in a very different execution.
Right.
It's
Right.
not a great experience, in my opinion. It's
I
a
don't
good movie, though.
I'll be honest, I don't remember it. I watched it and I don't really have a memory of it. It kind of gets lost in my Godzilla haze over the last few
Same.
years.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like it's mostly about like Japan's bureaucracy and failure
Mm.
to react to like the Fukushima reactor and stuff. It's like shades of
Gotcha.
that.
That's
It's
right.
not
Now it's
aiming.
ringing bells.
It's
And
not
I-
like this. If this
I-
is a Spielberg movie, that was like a Oliver Stone movie or something.
I-
You know what I
I-
mean?
I sort of remember the scope and effects being really well done.
Yo, they're
You know, that-
awesome.
that part of it.
They're
Mhm.
awesome. But
But
it's
that's all I really took away from it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's
Um,
a reason for the actual content why it would make less in America, is basically what I'm trying to say.
I think that sort of, speaks to the question, Bob. You said like that's like the Oliver Stone type experience of the Godzilla paint, right?
Right. Well, it's going through the very, like, think of JFK or something. It's going through the very specifics of why this happened, how this happened, why would this happen, all these things. And that's kind of what it's about. And every now and then you see Godzilla and he's growing and getting more dangerous and growing, but it's not like it, it doesn't have the same emotional core that something like this is aiming for. Like because
it's not trying to.
Yeah, I don't think it's trying to. Right.
Yeah.
I also felt, just through kind of luck in some ways, this movie came on the heels of Oppenheimer here. And
it's the sequel.
It feels like, I mean, it's
It really
the same
does.
world. It really does.
Yeah.
I made a joke the other day. It should have been like, somebody said Barzilla as opposed to, yeah, but it's I really do feel like this is a 1-2 punch with people.
It really does.
Like a different crowd that watched Oppenheimer, because then this is like that trauma and the things that resulted from, and Oppenheimer also kind of showed the regret after the bomb from the U.S. perspective. It was almost like what that did to the people that dropped the bomb, and this was what it did to the people there. The war in general. So I don't know. I think there was some kind of kismet there that the two kind of hit.
Be clear, one is an autobiography and one is fantastical. I mean, like, you can't say. I'm sure there is a serious non-Godzilla version of this movie you could make, right?
Sure.
Of Godzilla -1.
Well, it's not, Jamie. It's not specified on your talking point here, but when you pose this question, what's different about this Godzilla? It made me think about something you talk about a lot, which is like when you're writing something in the genre, like a comedy or a horror movie, you want to figure out what's the drama without the genre element, and can you tell a compelling drama on its own?
Right.
And then you paint it with the genre and you already have the drama told. And I think that's what stands out here, is it does that.
Right. And it sounds like, Shin Godzilla in its own way may have done that. But a lot
I can't remember either.
Shin Godzilla was dealing with
a long time ago.
Shin Godzilla was dealing with the Fukushima reactor, whereas this is dealing with like this armored Japan that was broken after World War II.
That's right.
It's a completely different scenario there.
Right. But what I'm saying is it deals with a drama story. A socially impactful, dramatic story. Whereas, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have trouble connecting that to like Matthew Broderick Godzilla. You know what I mean? Like, it's, to me, that's just, we got Godzilla. What do we do with them? Independence Day. You know what I mean? It feels less
Godzilla paint.
Yeah. It feels less like, let's connect it to a deeper, and I mean, I'm not picking on that movie really, because maybe it did try to do that.
That movie's taking its whips. It'll be okay.
It's taking its whips.
I actually probably like it more today. Like I've seen it.
Yeah.
If you don't call it Godzilla, it's a fun movie. I'm sorry. It's like it's not great. I'm not saying it's great, but it's fun.
It's got Matthew Broderick. It's the 90s.
Hank Azaria is great in it. Jean Reno.
It is what it is. But even the recent Godzilla movies, like, they're more akin to the Fast and the Furious than they are to anything.
Sure.
The Oppenheimer. This is why I'm saying, like, the Oppenheimer of it all, in some ways. I think that is what makes it different. I think I think that's why I have a fondness for the original Godzilla, and I can remember that movie. Like, I can remember the story and the beats of that movie. But I can't remember all those Saturday morning ones I watched, except for the fight scenes and the creatures and stuff like that.
The new ones are following the path of it being just genre movies, like you just said with Fast and the Furious. Right. And I think that's their aim. I think they're doing that, and I personally do love that. I love that in a different way, almost as much as I love this.
And those movies made 5 times as much as this in some
I think more
instances
than
or more.
5 for
Um,
yeah.
well, the first Godzilla made 500.
Yeah.
The first Godzilla, I'm sure Kong versus and stuff like that is even
Yeah.
bigger. But yeah, that's to me, like, those movies to me are just, I watch them and I'm not, again, there are people that like them, there are people that like I like parts of them too. I watch them all, but this is different. Like, this one hits totally different for me, and I think it's because it does nail the dramatic story, but it does also nail the social context. It's taking me to a world I haven't really thought about too much about, like a kamikaze pilot who didn't fulfill the mission, and what was
Yeah.
Japan like after the war, and who did they, what was the finger pointing and stuff like that. It's taking me to a different world that is interesting to me, much like Oppenheimer did in a different way. But it has Godzilla in it too, so it has some genre thrills, and it's pulling me through, and it's getting people to watch it that might otherwise not watch that movie.
If
So
I could,
yeah,
I would say the one MonsterVerse movie which I usually always defend is Kong Skull Island. And the
yeah,
reason is
yeah,
because in that movie it's about the insanity of Sam Jackson's character who doesn't want the war to be over, and he keeps creating new conflict because he can't live without a world without war. And that
right.
makes that movie so much more interesting because it's
Yeah.
Kong
I
versus Sam Jackson's sickness.
yeah,
Like that's
Yeah.
about
It's when
something.
society is the villain and he represents a place in that
Also
world.
shades of what
Yeah.
Vietnam meant to a lot of
Yes.
people,
That's
what it
that's
did
what
to
I
a
was
lot of.
getting
Yeah,
to. Yeah.
so it
yeah,
can work in those movies, it can be there.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For that movie, I agree with you. That's the most interesting part about that movie. To me, that part didn't land. It felt instead like some kind of artificial appropriation of that,
Okay,
to
Okay.
be
gotcha.
cool. Where this really felt like, and again, it could be like US, I'm a United States. So when I look at something from Japan, to me it's more sophisticated or
Yeah, it's
something
like
like that.
American guilt,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, yeah.
To them it might even to them to
Yes.
it might look like something like Kong Skull Island does.
To
They
us,
might be like,
yeah.
yeah, that
Exactly.
was good, but
Exactly.
we get it,
Like because I've seen Apocalypse Now,
right,
and I've
exactly,
seen
right.
and it's not the same to me. You know what I mean? One is like, it's, but this to me, if you told me, they were making a movie like this, I could kind of feel like it would be some of this. So, but again, that could just be my point of view. But I think your point well taken. I mean, to me, that's the most interesting of the recent movies. I really love that they said it during Vietnam and things like that, or that era. But anyway, that's really all I had to say about this. Like to me, that's what makes this one different, is the fact that it's it's almost like it. I don't think this is true. It's almost like it started as the drama. It's exactly the Jason Blum quote, which was, I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically said, like, for Get Out, his thing was, we want an interesting drama story that works alone before the other stuff is revealed, and if it works like that on its own before it's revealed, then when the monster comes, it's just all the more interesting, and it works. It has that engine, and I think that's what this movie is a great example of, and provides kind of inspiration to try things like that
I
when you write your own stuff.
It's the Godzilla movie where I took a friend who would hate every other Godzilla movie that exists to go see it, and I had to convince this person. I was like, "You'll like this movie," and they were like, "I don't see," they were like hesitant of a Godzilla movie, and I was like, "No, trust me," and they did. They ended up loving it. So like, it's that's the difference. It's like a person that would hate Godzilla versus Kong, this could still win you over because it's different.
Here's this is another interesting question. This is more a question that just popped into my head. I remember Ted Rossio and Terry Elliott, they wrote a Godzilla movie before the Matthew Broderick movie. Like they were first. Well, I don't know if they were first. There's probably 50 people that have written Godzilla movies over the years, but they posted their script on Word Player. You can go find it to this day. You can go read their script. And I remember one of the big things they thought, and I tend to agree with them. I used to always say, I don't know what I'd do with the Godzilla movie. because I if somebody asked me to pitch a Godzilla movie, I'd come up with something like probably the recent ones or something, because I wouldn't really know what to do. I'd be like, I can write the sequences, but I'm not sure what the and what their big thing was. They thought, and I think they were right, for my generation, they wanted to see Godzilla as the good guy at some point in the movie. Like, they did not want to see him as the monster. But watching this movie, the truth, I think my inner truth is, I like Godzilla as the monster and get rid of all these other monsters in some ways. Like, I think to me, for me personally, I think it works better this way, because it's less like we're sitting back and watching this giant monster fix our problem with this other giant monster. You know what I mean? While we're sitting there watching.
God, I love that, Jamie.
I get it. I get it.
That's the fact. That's where I'd argue that that's the fabric of what Godzilla is beyond just the first movie.
That's what Ted and Terry thought. And they did think that. And they did put that in. But to me, there's always this sense that it's hard to plug in an agency for your human characters when you have the two monoliths. That's what always kind of falls down in Godzilla movies if you're a purist in storytelling, because it really does come down to those two things fighting, and we're watching in some ways. It's hard to, and they try to figure out ways, like Millie Bobby Brown's going to run the magic, I don't know, device to lure Godzilla to the thing, to the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's all just becomes a mess to try to figure out how to do it. It becomes like, artificial, I don't know, nonsense in some ways. Really all we want to see is those two fight each other. We want to see Kong and Godzilla.
I think that's an appreciation for a different aspect of it entirely, though. Like, that's what makes Godzilla movies kind of fun and awesome, is like watching them struggle to figure out how to make that work, how to make the two guys in suits work. That's why they're so weird.
No,
and stuff, and that is.
I find it. That's why I feel like I couldn't do it. Like, I used to say I love Godzilla, but if I was asked to pitch it, I'd struggle with how to pitch it, because that part would drive me nuts. Like, all that stuff. And I get what you're saying. I mean, and ultimately, if you give me a good fight, like I know some of the recent Kong versus Godzilla stuff, there's just some wild stuff where they're using like things as swords and stuff like that, and it's like, or axes.
Well, Kong has an axe made of Godzilla's fin,
and it's just kind of all nutty and wild, and I like that. I think that's fun. But to me, it's almost
true
like
to the other eras. It's true that how stuff was. It's just CG instead of being.
It feels it's like what we said. Like, the only things I remember are the fight scenes.
Right.
I don't remember the story. But anyway, but that was Ted and Terry's thing. They believed that in order to have a Godzilla movie, people want to see Godzilla fight another monster and kind of be the good guy at some point in the movie. Like, he could start bad, but then you realize he's good, and then he fights something.
We should do Pacific Rim sometime to put it under this microscope.
Yeah.
I feel like
it makes me think of T-Rex in Jurassic Park being like the villain the whole time, and then in the end he's
the hero.
Yeah, he's the hero, kills the velociraptors that are trying to kill all our heroes.
Gareth Edwards sort of did in the 2014 Godzilla, right? Like, that was kind of the end of that movie.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, it just was bigger. The raptors were just
way slower.
Right. Yeah, way slower. Right. But that was the blueprint, obviously.
It was,
because he was the hero in the end, right? And now they've gone to the point where they're just like they're both heroes fighting off tons of stuff. I'm not disagreeing with you, Jamie. I'm just saying that I think that there's a place for both.
Yeah,
I think obviously people love both. So
I'm not even saying my thing is gospel. It's my opinion, purely my opinion. It's what I like in it, and what works, and what does. I'm more wrestling with what connects with me.
But if you only like Godzilla -1 and don't like all other Godzilla movies, I don't think you really like Godzilla that much. I'm not. It seems like I'm attacking Jamie, but like, Godzilla -1 is fucking great, but that's not exactly what Godzilla is as a whole. It's like it's like the first Godzilla movie and Godzilla -1, and then there's like 30 or 40 years of tons of films
I-
that I would
I'm-
say is more the fabric of it.
Yeah, and I think I've always been wrestling with how to combine the thing I love about Godzilla, those
Right.
fight scenes, with this kind of story and have it all work. And I still haven't seen that done to perfection, in my opinion.
Right.
Like where it all, I'm like, that's it, but yeah. But anyway, this is more my opinion stuff. So all good.
No, I think I'm not even arguing. I'm saying I wouldn't even call half the Godzilla movies I love good. That's not the point.
Right.
I think that's the difference. Is we're a script podcast, so talking about
Mhm.
stuff like that, it's odd because it's like culturally it's really relevant. Tons of fans, people love it, but it's not because of the script. It's not because of the script. That's not the reason. Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Opening scare types. Whose is this?
This is me. So and now I forgot I even put this on here. So it's funny. So I have, don't tell anybody, but I've secretly written a Monster in the House book that may one day see the light, not too long from now. But anyway, so this comes from that. There's a couple things that come from that, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. But so Monster in the House stories, and I'll hold on one second. Let me just open this up. Monster in the House stories are a thing from Save the Cat. Save the Cat has these genres. I talk about it all the time. This is my Groundhog Day. That every time it sounds like
yeah, he's got to say it.
Again, it's always the Ghost Hunter thing.
Me up.
Yeah.
I used to watch Ghost Hunters all the time, and I would always yell, "Oh, they're doing the EVP thing again. He's got to describe what an EVP is." And I would scream at the TV, and now I've become that guy. Electronic voice phenomenon is blah blah. And I'm like, yes, we've watched 100 episodes. We know what EVPs
Treating every
are. Stop
episode like
telling
it's someone's first episode is awful.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst things.
I've become Grant or whatever the guys, Jason and Grant from Ghost Hunters.
I love every single retread. I really do. From you.
Okay, I try to put a new spin on it every. No, I don't really. I just do it from memory.
I definitely don't with mine.
Yeah. So the Save the Cat genres are story patterns, unlike, like I would say, blockbuster genres. So comedy, drama, horror, they would be blockbuster genres. In Save the Cat, he used the term genres, which I personally wish he used something else, like story patterns or something, or story types. And he came up with 10 of them. And they're just kind of to help you figure out what story you're telling. And you know what's kind of amazing about the story genres is I think he kind of got them right. Like I don't sit here and say, you know what, he missed that one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think the 10 he kind of got right. So there's buddy love, which are either like buddy cop stories like Bad Boys or something, but usually like rom-coms, or maybe something like Rain Man or something like that. They're really stories about two people in a relationship.
And building off of what we've just been talking about, some of those Godzilla Kong movies are buddy love.
I was gonna say the newest Godzilla Kong movie. You could argue is that exactly.
Yeah, it could be.
Sorry, Jamie.
Oh no, good. There's Golden Fleece movies, which they're kind of like quest movies. Sometimes they're sports movies. It's someone's trying to obtain a prize or a specific goal, like a heist or something like that. And there's kind of a road to follow. And then there's a bunch of others. There's Dude with a Problem. There's Institutionalized. And we've talked about these on the show before. But the one we talk about the most is Monster in the House. And Monster in the House is where most of your horror movies come into play. And so Monster in the House, I might as well just do the Monster in the House thing now. I know that we're talking about that later. So Monster in the House is defined by 3 elements. A monster, a house, which is a location, or I always feel like the house, this part Blake didn't say, but this is kind of my thing, is partially like what they're trapped, like what's the geography or whatever they're trapped.
But it can be like a mind, right? It can be the
mind. It could be the human body. Like if it's the fly or something like that. Like how can you escape your own body if the monster's within you? So the house can be different things. So, take that almost the metaphoric house in some ways. Though oftentimes it is a house. It's like Amityville Horror or something like that. It is a house.
The Conjuring.
Event
The
Horizon
Conjuring.
is a spaceship. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't Breathe could be a house.
Mhm.
Yeah, Event Horizon is a spaceship. And then where are we? I'm sorry. The monster, the house, and the sin is where we're at.
Yeah.
So last but not least, I was like, there's one more. I can't remember what it is. And the sin, which again, I'm going to jump down to this and then we can come back to opening scares. The sin is usually the thing that brings about the monster.
Mhm.
It's usually there's some horrible thing that someone did. And because of that, the human race or a person or a group is culpable. And I always say there's some kind of like karmic equation at balance here. And the reason the sin is so important is because if there's no sin, the movie almost is nihilistic. It's like bad, and you know, it's less of a movie and more like real life. Like bad things just happen. Deal with it. You know, screw you. But if there's a sin,
I don't know why that's funny.
Yeah. If there's, and there are movies like that,
Yeah,
especially at the independent level where I'm at. I hear furniture moving upstairs in my house. The sin is being committed as we speak. So part of me has grown to believe over the years that the reason the sin is so important is because we as audience members kind of know that allows bad things to happen in movies. Like if somebody's committed some sin, if there's some horrible sin, there's going to be a price to pay in blood at some point. And it might not be fair, but it's kind of like goes back to like Adam and Eve or something like that, right? They stole the apple, so you know, now they die. It's basically where it happens. It goes all the way back to there. So it puts us off balance because we know the rules of movies, and we know if there's a sin, it kind of everybody's fair game now. Even people that weren't involved in the sin is fair game because that's just going to add
Nightmare
to
on
the
Elm
trauma
Street,
of the
right?
sin.
The kids didn't do anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in this, the question I had for you, for the two of you, and kind of like when I was watching this movie, because I saw something in this movie that I think I don't see in a lot of movies. So I thought it was instructive. I shouldn't say I don't see in a lot. It's in a lot of movies, but I don't see in most movies. And that's that I think the sin in this movie isn't directly connected to the flaw of the main character in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're tangentially like in the same World War II, you know, trauma kind of ballpark. And here's what I'm tracking, and you got feel free to weigh in because I just saw this and I've written about it in my book, but I didn't have a lot of great examples. And then I saw this and I was like, this is a pretty good example of this, I think. So I think the sin that brings about Godzilla. So in this movie, and I'm not sure like where this comes in the lore of Godzilla, which is another topic we can talk about later. But Godzilla already exists as a monster in this movie, right? He's like an ancient monster. And then the nuclear testing enhances him and mutates him into something bigger and more powerful. Am I tracking that correctly?
Because he says at the beginning that they already knew about Godzilla, the smaller version at the beginning.
The smaller version.
Yeah.
So it's basically like it juices them, makes them huge, gives them the beam powers or whatever they call it, the energy, whatever power.
Yeah.
So the sin, in my opinion, is the atomic testing. You know, it just like it's always been for Godzilla, right? And that brings about the monster. That's the worldwide problem that brings about the monster. However, the flaw in this is not, you know, our hero's flaw is of course not fulfilling his kamikaze mission. That's not his flaw. That's his shard of glass. But so his flaw is not feeling like he deserves to live a life after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's his flaw. So, but his sin that kind of created that is a shard of glass, which is another save the cat term. It's an origin story of the flaw, and it's not fulfilling his mission and not saving the people from Godzilla on the island in the
or
very
at least
beginning of the movie.
attempting to.
Right.
Right.
So therefore, he's always feels like he doesn't deserve to live a life after the war. He's still kind of stuck in the past in that way. So anyway, the two are sort of related because they both have their essence in an ultimate sin of war in some ways, but they're not exactly the same, and it happens in movies. It definitely is. Like even Poltergeist is one that we use as an example. I'm not sure that the sins, the flaws of the family are the same as the sin that brought about the ghost, which was when they built the houses and just
It
moved
happened
the
before the
tombstones.
movie started. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Bob,
yeah.
do you have something? Because I have a response, but
Go for
I
it. Go
feel
for
like
it.
you're super in tune with the movie and the context.
You go
within the
first.
franchise.
If I have anything, I'll add it.
Okay, so I'm yes-anding here, Jamie, because it's not so clean, but I feel everything you're saying and beyond it. I think it has something to do with, so like the wrong way, which is the sin. We talk about wrong way goals, and then the character eventually has to figure out the right way. The wrong way of society that he lives in, that all our characters live in, is portrayed as he believes it's the lie he believes, right, Jamie? Which is that my duty in order to succeed was to sacrifice my life for the war. And that is the wrong way of the entire country's mindset that the movie portrays. And the government, the off-screen government, keeps giving them like gag orders, and like, everybody knows that Godzilla is coming, but they don't tell the citizens. And what happens? They're continuing to go the wrong way because they're putting sacrificing people at the expense of quote unquote victory. Like, it's going to be easier if we just let everybody just like let him come do his thing. And so then there's a quote right from the movie that I took that I didn't put on this talking points, but it is this. So when they're revving up for the big battle and their sensors come in, tell them that Godzilla is coming and he's going to be there like tomorrow. And so they give us that big status update. Doc, his name is Noda, we'll just call him Doc, the guy who's in charge of the plan, who's on the Minesweeper team. He has this big speech and he's like, remember, this battle isn't about a fight to the death. This battle is about a fight to live for our future. And I think the whole inner turmoil of the character, to your point, Jamie, is fighting that wrong way societal programming that he's supposed to sacrifice his life, and everyone around him is also supposed to sacrifice their life for country. And what they learn as like a community is, no, we should be trying as hard as possible to not sacrifice a single life. And they literally say that. So I think the sin could just be traced back to their society, and our characters within that society have been led to believe and have been acting upon that belief that they need to sacrifice their life. So that's what I think. Yeah.
It's
so I
like,
think you had
that's
it,
cool.
Jamie.
It's like how the movie is a metaphor for what Japan had to go through in World War II and what it did in World War II. The main character is a metaphor for his entire society learning a lesson, sort of.
Yes.
Right? You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And there's lots of agents in change. This is also not on the talking points, but there are lots of agents in change in the story, and they're all on the positive side. There's so many people in his lives who are like on the right way side, but they're not in the fight. They're kind of like the people who aren't in the fight, like his parents who died during the air raids. They left him a note that said like, don't kill yourself, live, come back to us alive. They were an agent of change, even though they weren't alive in the story. We know what they want, So,
It's interesting that you say that. So even a bigger lesson from that, it reminds me of a lesson I learned early when I was screenwriting. One of my earliest screenplays I co-wrote with a friend of mine, Pete, and it was this is very common. It was like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with famous wizards, right? So I mashed up all these famous like Merlin and Sherazade and all these different people.
Gandalf.
And they well, they had to be public domain. I even threw in. I think I ran out. And it was like
Brandolph.
I think like Dracula was in the group or something. You know, he was like
Okay.
a wizard. So I remember we were talking about the theme, and we were like, what's the theme of this? And it was kind of like nuclear disarmament somehow was what came to mind, like back when we wrote the script. And what we realized was whatever the world theme was, this is a major lesson. This is why I bring this up. I remember it was the first time it dawned on me. Whatever the world theme was, somehow the individual hero needed to be going through the same thing as the world. So they both the world and the hero were going through the same thing. And that's what we see here. So if I would have learned this, it would have saved me. I don't know. That was probably like my 8th script or something.
It takes time, man. It takes time.
Yeah, sure.
It took me that long to ask that question. I was like, but is that the theme, or is it? And I think it was my friend Pete who was like, well, that's not the theme, because I said nuclear disarmament, and he said the theme is like what your character's personally going through. And then it dawned on me, it was like, oh, they have to be connected. You know, the two have to be basically in some ways the same thing, even though it's not like your hero is dealing with nuclear disarmament, but it might be the thing where it's the hero is making the same mistake that world leaders, like maybe you need to listen to each other or something. You know what I mean? Maybe you need, I don't know, whatever that thing is that's causing nuclear disarmament in your mind. That should be what your hero is also kind of struggling with.
In this case, with like the whole kamikaze aspect of it, I think one of the things that makes this movie, to go with what Jamie's saying, what makes this movie so amazing is like, what's the name of the guy that even I'm bad with names. The guy that rebuilds the plane. I actually don't.
I got it.
The mechanic.
The mechanic. We'll just call him.
We'll just call him
the mechanic. But one of the reasons I think this movie reads so well, and with what you're saying, is like it feels like he has an entire arc himself, and he has a whole movie himself. And when we finally learn that he learned the lesson that the loss of life is not something that's meaningless. It's like this beautiful moment, not just because of our main character, because of him. He learned the lesson too. Like,
he's learning too.
That's like it's like so much more powerful that they both
and others around
them are realizing that this was not that sacrificing life carelessly is not the way to go. Like, that's why it makes it beautiful.
Even his neighbor, when we meet her, she's like piling on the guilt, like, you show your face here, like you're a disgrace,
and then she's like, live.
All of our village is dead because of you. And by the end, she's like, when she discovers that he's left all the money for Akiko, his daughter, she's upset because she wants him to live.
Right.
So she's changed, Yeah,
it feels communal. That's where this movie succeeds in, like, so much.
By the way, Nostradamus was one of my wizards, and I'm remembering now. And Faust, I remember those.
All
two.
right, there you go.
There were still some more, but I can't. They're the ones I can think of at the moment.
Doesn't sound too bad. Yeah. What?
No, Bob. Cool. The mechanic's name is Tachibana.
Tachibana, right?
I got it.
Oh, Sasaku Tachibana, right? Okay.
So anyway, so now going back to the original opening image,
opening scares. Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, in Monster in the House movies, usually they start with some scare scene. It's very rare. I mean, there are movies that don't start with a scare scene. There's not some kind of horror in the beginning, but it's very, very rare. And there's a couple different types of opening scare scenes. There's first kills, which is often just like the first time we see either the monster has killed at all, or the first time in this string of kills the monster kind of kills. It's like
Jaws.
You kind of see him. Jaws, exactly. Jaws is one of the ones I say. And Scream.
We're gonna bring up Jaws a lot, I feel like. So
yeah, we are
coming.
Yeah. The other one, the one I always say I don't love a lot is the flash forward. Some movies that use this, it's funny. Rise of the Evil Dead, Don't Breathe has a little flash forward. It kind of starts with. It's not my favorite of the bunch, but it works when it works. The origin of the horror, sometimes it's like how the monster was created or something, like Halloween. That's another one that's very popular. But then there's this last one that I see a lot, and it's interesting that this movie combines two, I think, in some ways. So the other one I call the horror before the horror, and it's kind of like a scary scene without the monster. So Midsommar has the suicide scene, in the beginning. The Descent has a scene like that.
It's a car
Megan
crash. Yeah.
Megan has a car crash like that too.
Yeah.
And it's some kind of horror beat without the monster present, or some horror beat that usually is the shard of glass of the character, right? So that's the thing of Midsommar and the Descent and Megan. It's kind of the shard of glass. It's the thing that starts the flawed kind of approach and stuff like that. It's a backstory piece that informs the flaws, the arcs, things like that. This movie is interesting because it has the monster,
Yeah.
but it's also the horror before the horror. And that's, I don't know that I've seen that. I mean, maybe like some movie like Hellraiser or something, which is hard to decipher exactly how it works. But I love Hellraiser, as we've done Hellraiser, right?
We've done new and old. Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. But it's interesting because not a lot of movies are the shard of glass and the horror before the horror, and that's what this one does. It's almost, and I would have imagined it more to be like, if this was more like Moby Dick, like, I got to kill Godzilla, and I'm obsessed with it the rest of my life. Like, I could see that version working, but that's not what this does at all. Like, he's not
just
that way at all.
Tiny bit of that.
Just a tiny
You could
bit.
also almost argue that even though we don't see his kamikaze piloting failure, we kind of see a reflection of it again, and that's sort of all three of those. You sort of get that thing too. We see his failure as a kamikaze pilot again,
right?
And that's his origin of his shard or whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
We understand what his old way is for sure in that moment.
Right. Well, they just give us another example of him being scared to die.
He kind of doubles down.
Yeah, he doubles. He fails at kamikazeing twice, so.
And then he gets a chance at redemption, and he fails at that. Like, he doesn't do that.
Yeah,
he doesn't take it.
Yeah, when I was gonna track the meaningful choices, there's 3 from him in that opening scene, which is a lot for a main character. 3 of the big choices come right up front, and they're all choices in the wrong way.
Right. Monster backstory versus monster lore. Who's this?
This is just a real quick one that I wanted to mention. So, the interesting thing about horror movies in general is studio execs and producers and stuff often ask me for rules, like, why is Godzilla doing this? Where does he come from? What does he do? Blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times I need to answer those questions. So the way I've taken in my mind to differentiate it, there's a monster backstory and there's monster lore. And the lore is what happens in the movie, and the backstory is what I tell the producers, right? And they're maybe I tell the producers, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just write it for myself. Maybe I write some, like, where did Godzilla come from? He was he came from outer space on a meteor or something, and I make that up. But the key thing with horror, why it works, I think a lot of times, is it needs to be lore and not backstory. Like, once we know every single thing about the monster, and I think some of the recent movies may do this more because they're more science fiction than horror in some ways, I think it becomes less scary. But if Godzilla is just some weird local cryptid and we don't know what he is, that's more like lore. And I think for the most part, when you write your horror stories, think about the lore and not think about what the world knows about it and not what you've written about it in the specifics. But I think both are important. Like, I think it's important for you to write the backstory sometimes just to help you make decisions, but don't tell people everything that's in the backstory. Tell them what the world knows about the backstory in your stories. So that's what I think this movie demonstrates that a little bit. Like, it doesn't really say where Godzilla specifically comes from. It's not like we know exactly where he comes from. We have no idea. He's just some weird cryptid that's on the side.
That got nucleared. Radiated.
They imply it. It's a lot of implied stuff to let us fill in the... You know what it made me think of, Jamie, when you described it that way, is an extension of the big world, small window. You want a big lore, small lore window.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just give me a small glimpse of that window.
It's like writing Poltergeist, right? Like, you don't need to explain the history of ghosts and Christianity and all this other stuff with like consecrated ground, and you don't need to explain all that. It's just...
But there is a version of a bad version
of it that does.
Where there's like flashbacks of like, you know,
of a
200
priest
years ago in the real estate area, and then they flash to the same spot, and it's like a desecrated grave that's being turned into a house plot.
I mean, we've joked about, like, I think it was Paranormal Activity 2, which it's like the ghost is just messing around with the pool, like it's pulling like the pool cleaner out or something like that.
We've joked because that was my thing. Like, why is it doing that? And
why does it do that? And that's always the thing I come back to.
Why are ghosts always opening drawers and moving chairs?
Right.
Like, what? Why? Like,
because it's easy to execute on the screen.
But
it's cheap to move a chair.
I can put fishing line on the drawer and pull it out, and you can't even see the line in the shot.
But like,
my wife,
Bob. I know it's funny. It's just,
my wife loves to watch like TikTok videos of like haunted houses or something that people obviously stage, like a door slams suddenly or something like that.
That stuff can be fun,
and it's just like, we don't need to. Part of the fact that we don't understand it is why it's scary. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why did a door suddenly slam on my house? I have no idea. There's no method. It's never explained why the ghost is messing with the pool. You know, why it's obsessed with cleaning the pool and not cleaning the pool. But something about it, like, I don't really think about that. I'm too worried about, like, oh my, why did the thing turn off?
Or did either of you see Skinamarink?
Did not.
I haven't seen it yet.
I'm not recommending it, and I'm not saying we should do it, but it's basically a whole movie of that type of thing. It's...
I had 2 people ask if we would do it, and I said
it would be a weird episode, but
knowing what it is,
but like, as far as unknowable what's going on and why the evil or the entity is doing what it's doing, it's just a whole movie of that. It's like, why, you know, just why.
And I mean, the Blair Witch Project is that to an extent,
right.
You know, I mean, there's tons of movies that are like that, and I think they're a lot of very scary movies.
Why can't she just talk? Why can't she just say, "Hey, I'm bad and I want to do this"? Instead, she's running around the woods making little dolls. Like, come on.
Right.
I think after 120 episodes, it's easy to say that movies that emphasize how the story is told, and we're probably going to do Deadpool soon, so this is I'm contradicting myself here, but
that's
movies
comedy,
that emphasize how the story is told as above what the story is, and telling the story itself, don't translate well to this show and like what we do on this show. So Skinamarink strikes me as a movie that is heavy on how the story is told and not actually what the story is. So I don't think it would be worth us
it's
talking
your kryptonite
about.
Jimmy. It's all vibe.
It's
all vibe. And I get
why
people dig it. I get why people dig
like
it.
Vibes, great. I don't want to watch someone walk down a hallway for 10 minutes and the only thing that happens in the story is they get to the end of the hallway. That is my hell.
There's scenes in Skinamarink that are not even that. It's like a shot of a wall. It's like
creepy music, great composition, vibes 100, up as loud as possible, as cool as possible, but literally all that happened is someone walked from one end of the hallway to the other, and there's 4 scenes of that, and then the movie's over. That's not for me.
That's not for you. And I've been the voice on this show of always saying I think movies can be anything.
Yes.
We're a script show and we talk about scripts, but that doesn't mean that I agree that if something has a bad script or if it's just vibes that I don't like it or it's invalid. You know? Like, I like those kind of movies sometimes. You know what I mean? And
Godzilla -1 is not that.
It's not that. But there's a lot of Godzilla movies that are horrifically written that I super freaking enjoyed. So it's not, I'm just saying that movies can be anything and you're not always tied to it. Has to be the thing you're saying, explaining what the movie is. There's some Godzilla movies that are just info dumps and them explaining what's scientifically happening. It's awful. Like I don't know how to say, but that the fun of it is how bad it is. So it's still a movie though. It still counts. It's still valid.
So you're saying they're all backstory.
A lot of them are. Yeah, that's why when people get all like this is what Godzilla should be, and I'm like, no. I'm like, Godzilla actually, it can be anything. It has a bunch of different colors. It can be a lot of different aims. This happens to be the prestigious one aiming for like the first movie, you know. But I was going to go back and say, you said Deadpool. To me, that's comedy, satire, parody. That has different rules than the stuff we're talking about, right?
Gotcha.
Right? I mean, that's like it's almost
it
like
changes the game.
it's almost a parody movie. So
yeah,
it's like if we did Naked Gun, you can't. You know what I mean? You can't put the same rules on it.
Yeah.
Was that everything, Jamie, on that? Premise with a new skin. This is Jimmy, I think.
Yeah, so this is Jamie, do you want to kind of introduce premise with the new skin, and then we'll just like bounce off of that?
Sure. I mean, just super quick to understand it. It would be like if you did a movie about, I don't know, let's say we wrote the pod race movie for Star Wars.
Okay.
And then we looked at, I don't know, Days of Thunder, and we skinned it with Star Wars. You know, it's like, what does Days of Thunder do? What does the pod race do? What can we mix and match? And we give it a new skin, and it feels fresh because suddenly our race car scene has sand people and, you know, all kinds of weird, I don't know, people could use the Force or whatever happens.
I mean, Star Wars, the first Star Wars is a new skin of Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress.
Yeah.
So I mean,
exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
Like you can reskin Star Wars. Star Wars is a reskin. So
yes.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. And we've done this in the point of this is another brainstorming technique to, you know, mash up things and ideas and get freshness based on like combining things. And there's a lot of people who are snooty about this, and they frown. They just like get really touchy about, oh, well, this is just a ripoff of that. And this is, well, we did this on the Alien episode. We did this on the Jaws episode. We did this on the Speed episode, because entire movies lines for years to come have been based on this activity, this technique, which is, you know,
Die Hard meets The Matrix.
Yeah, Alien with a haunted house skin is Event Horizon. The shark Jaws with a tornado, Sharknado. Jaws, you know, there's a million of Jaws with this equals that.
I was gonna say Twister, but yeah.
Yeah, Jaws meets Twister is Sharknado. There you go.
Yeah.
Jaws with a Twister skin. It's the this meets that. It's the with a new skin, with new paint, however you want to articulate this. And
I think we're all guilty. All three of us have been guilty of being like, this movie is just that. You know?
Yeah,
and sometimes it turns you off.
It doesn't have value.
It doesn't have, it doesn't mean it, yeah.
And I argue, like, for instance, you know, John Wick, with a culinary, what is it, like a Seattle culinary community skin is pig. And I think that this technique is how genre evolves. I think you can point to that and see how that leads to positive evolution of the genre and how we play with it and extend, you know. And what was interesting to me about this, and we haven't talked about this, is how you can do the same thing just for a scene or a sequence.
Yeah.
And it's the same, it creates the same freshness. And I'm speaking about the Jaws shark hunt sequence with Godzilla paint, with the Godzilla skin. In my opinion, that's the best sequence in the movie. And there isn't anyone who has like a basic cinematic knowledge that doesn't see that it's Jaws with Godzilla paint, right?
Yeah,
So,
especially when it hits the end of it with the thing in its mouth. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
like,
I mean,
it's
yeah,
hard
so-
not to see that.
But I didn't have like examples of how it played with all of the many ingredients that are in the Jaws shark hunt sequence. But Instead of the buoys, it's the two mines, and instead of the their careers are different, and instead of a shark fin, it's Godzilla's fins. Like they played with the recipe, and they put the Godzilla paint on every single one of those little things, and in my opinion, it felt fresh. Like, I was never like, this is stupid. I was like, this is amazing, like, the entire time. So I don't know, I think it's instructive to say, like, this is an exercise. If you're going, I think people, when they realize that they're inspired by something, they get scared that they're being derivative. And I think that that's the wrong direction. I think when you understand what inspires your idea, you should identify everything that's special about that idea and use your premise and all the things that are unique to subvert it and tweak it so that it is now your fresh thing that could only exist in your movie. And I think this sequence does that, is like a perfect example of why acknowledging your influence and leaning into your influence is a good thing if you're smart about it. So yeah.
I remember early when I was writing, like maybe even before it was screenwriting, I was in some writers group, and there was one person that approached everything by like brainstorming and just saying to everything that you'd say, that's cliche, that's cliche, that's cliche. And I started to realize, I think I just start with the cliche, and then I'm like, why don't we just start there and then turn it into the thing that's not cliche? Like, isn't that easier than
It's
just
your
coming
friend.
up? Yeah, like then coming up with a billion ideas and just rejecting all of them. Like, and it was really difficult to work with that person, because that literally was all they did, and they didn't get very far with that. They usually came up with something that was really bland, because at least the bland thing wasn't cliche. It was
right.
It was like, let me not take any chances that it'll be cliche, and then so it is what it is. But
there's also a lot of a subsection of filmmakers who just don't want to do genre because of, in general, they look down on genre because of this stuff.
Sure.
I was gonna say too, just I was looking for, while you guys were talking, to prove that the Jaws paint isn't a problem for the one person it should be, is there's a quote by the director who said Steven Spielberg saw him in person and made a beeline for him and said, "Oh, you're the director of Godzilla. I saw it 3 times. I couldn't believe it." And then he said, "Because Spielberg is like a god to me, just for what he's done for the film industry, but it sounded very real." Spielberg said, "I saw it once in my home, and then I had to go see it again in IMAX and then Dolby. You can't make that up." So he literally, Spielberg saw the movie 3 times, and it was a movie that is obviously inspired by Jaws. So he doesn't have a problem with it. So,
and to your point, you know
it,
what, Bob, you know what you just made me remember? There was
Yeah.
an AMC special. God, I don't remember the name of it. There was an interview with Steven Spielberg, because Steven Spielberg is very famous for not wanting to do what we do on this show. He's like the anti-Penn and Teller. He does not want to spill the secrets.
That's why he doesn't do
That's
commentaries.
why he doesn't do commentaries.
Right.
But this AMC special, I can't remember what it was called. It was a sit-down interview with him, and it was like 2 hours long, and he was spilling the secrets. And he was talking about how a lot of people don't recognize, they think he came up with this great shot or this great idea.
Sure,
and he's like, it's because they haven't seen this 1930s movie where I loved this scene, and I just did my new spin on this scene that no one is aware of because they've just never seen it. So the masters are doing it too. I guess what frustrates
Tarantino, right?
Yeah,
like Tarantino.
yeah,
I just listened to the Barbie commentary they just put on Max. They just put a
I
bar.
haven't
If you didn't know
heard
that,
that. That's awesome.
it's new. They just put it up.
Yeah,
And like every scene, Greta Gerwig's talking about the movie that inspired the scene.
the influence.
And these are movies from the 30s and 40s, which
Yeah.
most of the audience has never seen.
Yeah.
But it's there. She's doing
That's
it
awesome.
too.
Yeah. See, and they're your friend. They're how you identify what's special and how you can make it different in your own thing. So it's just when I run it. So the reason that I brought this up, besides the movie being a great example of it, is what I run into a lot with the amateur screenplays. I haven't said the bingo card yet. Yeah, I read amateur screenplays 5 days a week. And what happens is I will identify, because they're not because the writer, I often work with new writers for context for anyone who's listening to this for the first time. So by the nature of how I speak about the craft and our show and just, who I am, I often will attract people who are on their first script or their second script or their third script. They're still new to the craft. And what I notice a lot is I'm seeing a scene that is derivative. That is the cliche that Jamie's talking about, which is the first idea. And then they haven't done anything with their premise to make it unique to their premise. And my note is like, this is derivative of this, like suggesting that you use the things I preach on the script, like identify this part, the genre paint that you're playing with, the why here, why now paint, the characters paint, blah, blah, blah. And you can do this scene. You can just do it your way. And every single time the newbie is like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be derivative. Like, I'm cutting that scene. And I'm like, no, that's not the answer. The answer is to like lean into it. So anyway, this movie does that. It's great effect.
It feels like it's such a nuanced argument of a thing, right? Like people are like, all right, I thought you were supposed to be original. Like,
yeah,
well, you
it's
are.
Like, there is nothing that's original ever.
You are a combination of your environment for the past, like, how many decades you've been alive.
Accept it.
Yeah,
accept it.
Accept that even your ideas are not
your
original.
Idea came from
someone else.
That came from something that came from something.
Yeah.
The one thing, just because it's kind of related. So one thing I noticed about this movie structurally that's sort of different. It does, that Jaws, in my opinion, does too. And there's different ways you can analyze any movie, like structurally. And I'm doing this in a very Save the Cat model, but there's even many ways you can analyze Save the Cat models. Everybody looks at it differently. But I saw this movie as having a very long finale and an early all is lost moment. So the all is lost moment is the moment usually where it's kind of usually there's a death of somebody very important, and it sends somebody into a long wallowing period where they have to reflect on the shard of glass, sometimes admit harsh truths to themselves, and then usually be pulled out of that to then go on a final mission or journey or something like that. And if I look at that, it's when, the woman dies in the attack on the city, and then he's kind of crushed by that, and it kind of reflects, and that's the all is lost moment. But it happens like almost near the midpoint. It's like at the 60-minute mark. Similarly with Jaws, the way I track Jaws, and by the way, different people do this differently. Like some other people track Jaws differently, but the way I track it is when his kids almost die, or his son almost dies, and he finally then goes to the mayor and says, "Pay Quint, we're going on a mission. We're going to hunt the thing. We're going to go hunt it as opposed to it hunting us." And I feel like the same structural thing is happening in this movie. I think the structure is kind of echoed in that way.
Inspired by,
where there's a long hunt, in the end. There's a long mission to take down Godzilla in the end. And but the all is lost kind of happens closer to the middle of the movie as opposed to the end. So
they're taking that premise with a new skin, and they're doing the same thing with the structure too.
I think so.
What you're saying.
And it's a completely different structure. Like the all is lost beat isn't the same. Like when Godzilla attacks the city and destroys, that's like something we almost need from a Godzilla movie, right?
Right, yeah.
So they deliver that, but it is personal. That's what they're taking is this just Godzilla just killed someone I love.
This time it's personal.
Yeah, this time it's personal. It's personal now. It's like it's attacked, and it makes everybody reflect and rethink what they're doing. So it does different things. It's in no way like some movies actually they take structure and adapt it very specifically. Like, and this one doesn't really do that at all. But I do notice that it does have the long finale, like the whole thing, the plan, the heist. It's almost like a chapter, it's like the third chapter of the movie, and it's kind of divided in that way.
Is it nuts to say that chapter also has its all is lost moment
Abs-
too.
and
Mhm.
Like when
and
the
you
plan doesn't work, it feels really
Yep.
hopeless.
yeah,
You know.
and similarly, Jaws has, when Quint
Yeah,
dies
right.
and the boat's
Mhm.
capsized, it's very
Mhm.
similar
Yeah.
in that way. And honestly, I think that relates as much to like the high tower surprise we talk about in the
Mhm.
5
And
point
then the
finale.
dig down deep.
Right,
Yeah,
He does.
which
He flies in. Yep.
yeah, which is usually like an all is lost moment. Usually those two moments almost compete with each other. Like when you're breaking your story, when you're figuring out your story, you're like, should I kill Quint at the all is lost or should I kill him at the high tower surprise? And you kind of get
Right.
in this debate in your head, and usually you have to figure out what happens when.
Do we talk? We didn't talk confessional scenes yet, right?
No,
No,
we
I
didn't.
skipped
Yeah,
it.
and Jamie very organically weaved in a later topic, so that was great. So confessional scene. So, one of the things that I love about this movie is how it's telling a story, from another cultural perspective, and that's not really made for an American audience. But here we are. Some of these techniques we talk about, are just universal for storytelling. And one thing I noticed is that this movie has some of your prototypical confessional scenes.
Mhm.
So what a confessional scene is Jack Epps Jr., who wrote Top Gun and the Dick Tracy, the 90s Dick Tracy, and the something called The Secret to My Success, and a bunch of 90s,
Love that
80s and
movie.
90s movies. Yeah. And he wrote Anaconda.
Hell yeah.
And he was one of my first script consultants, so I learned a lot from him. And he is where I learned this term. And there's another well-known script consultant who used to be the editor of Creative Screenwriting magazine, and his name is Jim Mercurio. I think he used to go by James Mercurio. And he calls this the killer share. And that is like, it's some point in the story where we've just been waiting for the hero to acknowledge, vocalize all of these inner turmoils that we've been watching throughout the story. And it's basically their moment where they say, it's all my fault, and all the greats have them, man. Like all the great arc plot Hollywood cheeseburgers. Toy Story, Woody is like literally in a milk crate that looks like a confessional, right? He's got like the shadows on his face, like he's sitting in a confessional. That's deliberate. And he says, what chance does a toy like me have against an action figure? I'm the one who should be strapped to that rocket. He admits that he's jealous. And Dr. Sleep has a great one where Dan's sitting at the bar in the hotel, and he says, a man takes a drink, the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes the man, and he admits that he's allowed his addiction to control him. Die Hard, the famous one where Al, the cop
Right,
who's
right.
been helping John the entire time, tells him that he had an accident, like he hasn't shot a gun since he shot a kid. He admits his guilt for that. And John even has one where he's talking about the problems with his marriage being his fault with Holly. Like Holly didn't do anything wrong, and it's all like his fault, and he was an asshole. So they both have an I share, you share confessional. Godzilla -1 has, I think, I'm calling him Kosa. Like I said, he goes by 3 names. Our main character, Shikishima, Shiki-san. I'm calling him Kosa because some of the characters called him that. He admits, and the Jamie, you know how you were saying the all is lost felt like it came early. So usually these confessionals, they come at the end of Act 2 or in the beginning of Act 3. This one comes at 46 minutes. So it's really early.
Damn.
I think they probably come around the Dark Night of the Soul often.
Yeah, it kind of accompanies that beat, right? And so Kosa, like, he's been looking at these objects, and I'll get into that on my next talking point. He's been looking at the photos of the mechanics who all died on the beach in the opening, and Noriko, his partner, she says, if you're carrying some burden, I wish you'd share it with me. And then he tells her the whole story, and we hear him for the first time in the movie vocalize all the stuff we've been witnessing. He gives kind of his own emotional context to all of those feelings, which he's like, I turned my back on my country. I abandoned my duty. Then I had a chance to save these people with Godzilla, and I got scared, and they all died. And then here again, I just saw him again, and I ran away from Godzilla again. And he just says all the things we know he's been feeling, but he admits
I don't
it.
deserve to live, pretty much.
He says, "I don't
Yeah,
deserve to live." Yeah, and then she's an agent. She's his like primary agent of change. So she said, "You are alive, and you deserve to live." That's the lesson she's trying to teach.
Right.
The story is using her to teach him. And then I think he has a second confessional, which is unconventional, and it works really well. Which is, this is now Jamie at the beginning of the third act, when they're into the planning stages of the the long final act, when he's with the mechanic who was on the beach and saw him, knows he pretended like his plane didn't work so he could avoid being a kamikaze, and has basically blamed him for the deaths of all the people on the beach. He says to that mechanic, when they're making the plan to like secretly kamikaze into Godzilla, he says, "I know what I need to do, but the funny thing is, I want to live." And that's like a second confessional, right? Now he's like confessing, like, I've learned the lesson, but I'm not willing to admit that I know the right way.
To be
now.
fair, I think he always knew he wanted to live.
Yeah.
He had to just say it to himself.
And I think that's really unconventional that we get too.
The lesson is being honest with yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So I thought there was 2 confessionals, and I think that's unconventional for a lead character, and I love it. And that was like one thing that really struck me watching the movie.
Very cool. The MacGyver exercise.
This is one of my favorites. So it's sometimes this is the not so secret weapon. So Jamie, introduce the not so secret weapon, and I'll bounce off of that.
Yeah, sure. So the not so secret weapon is a term we have for something, you probably already know because you've listened to this podcast and we talk about it nonstop. No. So the example, it's almost best to give as an example. It's crossing the streams in Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
It's something that's set up and in kind of a way that doesn't seem like it's going to be the big result. We kind of circle it in our minds and be like, wait a minute. What,
Chekhov's gun.
Chekhov's gun. It's a Chekhov's gun that brings about, it's like the final weapon used.
It's the Chekhov's gun.
It's the Chekhov's gun. It's the ultimate one. The loader in Aliens,
the air tank in Jaws.
The air tank in
Jaws. Yeah.
Always comes back to Jaws.
And the sneakier you can be about setting it up, like if you can set it up on a joke, like Jaws does a good job setting it up on a joke. Doesn't he say, "Hey, be careful with those, they'll explode," or something? He kind of scolds him. And it kind of makes it like a little character moment. Like he doesn't know his way around the boat, but really it's setting up, hey, there's something that's going to explode later on. And if you can do it, like Aliens also does it in a great way, because it's kind of her showing how she knows how to use it. She can work with these dudes side by side. She knows how to use the loader. She's not like some passenger on this mission, and it's kind of done as a character moment. And it's like, okay, that's cool. And then you kind of forget about it until the end when she shows up with it. And that's the not so secret weapon. And it's almost in every movie, and it doesn't even have to be a thing.
It doesn't have to be so
an
precise.
idea.
You could argue like the Christmas decorations in Die Hard are the not so secret surprise for when he tapes using the Christmas packing tape to tape the gun to his back.
See, that's a great segue.
Yeah.
So it's not always the Chekhov's gun, and that's why I'm not calling this talking point the not so secret weapon. I'm calling it the MacGyver exercise, the MacGyver move, which is using what's unique about the situation. It could just be situational, right? It doesn't have to be the climactic thing.
Right.
But what I read in new scripts and new writers is they're basically writing the first idea that comes to mind. And usually that first idea is not the most creative one. It's kind of like the thing that all the audience members would think of first. And that's why it's the worst idea. And so I have this exercise, and often my note will be is, this is not a MacGyver move, like this is doing something to get out of the situation that makes it too easy that anybody could figure out. And you want to be creative enough. You want to make the obstacles and the situation unique enough and difficult enough that the character has to use what's there and what's unique about all of it, their skill set, the scenario, the paint, like for instance Christmas Paint and Die Hard, to give us this MacGyver move that we could only see in this situation and not in any other movie ever. And yeah, so like this movie has, and that's so I give them an exercise to say, what's your character's MacGyver move in this scene? Like, here's your scene. They got out of it way too easily and way too conventionally. Give me your fresh thing. And so to your point, Bob, the Die Hard taping, what does he do?
He uses that Christmas packing tape
Yes,
to tape
Christmas
the gun to the
packing
back
tape.
of his neck.
That is the definition of a MacGyver move.
Right.
Like John McClane MacGyvered the shit out of that situation.
Right.
Right. And it's something that feels unique and special to the Christmas time setting of the movie. So there you go. Some examples are like in Get Out, Chris uses the cotton in the chair he's tied to plug his ears and prevent himself from being brainwashed. That works on multiple levels. That is a MacGyver move.
He picks cotton to save himself and kill the racists. Right?
That's the definition of a premise-specific tactic.
Right,
That's his MacGyver move. In Silence of the Lambs, this isn't the not-so-secret weapon. This is Hannibal Lecter's MacGyver move, is he steals Chilton's face and clothes to escape the courthouse, right? And he's sitting in the ambulance pretending to be Chilton. You're like, so like that's the definition of a MacGyver move. And so I think there's 3 in this movie, and it's my favorite one, which is kind of the bigger crossing the streams, is the plan. What's the plan to kill Godzilla? The literal line of the movie is, we will kill it with the power of the ocean.
Right.
You know, like, and they're using everything that's special about the ocean. You know, it's going to be the deepest trench in the ocean, and we're going to use the warships. All the things that are unique and special to the movie are all combined into this very unique, special plan that is their gigantic MacGyver move to get Godzilla, right? So that's one example. The second one is one of my favorite ones in the movie is Kosa Shikishimi, whatever you want to call him. He writes a letter to Tachibana because he knows that Tachibana blames him for all the deaths of those mechanics, and he writes a letter to Tachibana blaming Tachibana for all the deaths because he knows that's the only way this guy's going to show up. If he can piss him off enough. That's a MacGyver move, man. That's like using what's unique. That is as creative and unique to Kosa and the situation as you can get. And it's very unconventional. We don't really seen it before. So I consider that a great example of a MacGyver move.
An emotional MacGyver move.
Yes. Maybe I need to categorize these, codify them even more. Yeah. And then number 3 is Kosa's gonna kamikaze into Godzilla's mouth and with a plane rigged with bombs. I mean, that couldn't be more specific to his character and the premise. So yeah, there's 3 examples of them. I wouldn't call them not so secret weapons. It's more like they're just like tactics that are like very specific and specialized, and they're all memorable as a result. So try harder.
You can say that for every talking point. Try harder.
The interesting thing about, like, when I write these, a lot of times they don't come first, they come second, you know. So I might write the whole script. I'll give you an example. I was writing a script the other day, and I just have a scene that the villain, like, pulls a knife out and stabs somebody, right? And it was like a butcher knife from the kitchen. But then I saw it and I was like, well, this butcher knife's brand new. So then I seeded it back to another scene, and I seeded it to another scene, and seeded it. So it's used like 3 times, but I went in reverse as opposed to, like, I was like, oh, well, that could be that knife instead of the thing. And it almost became like a little thread in some ways. Like, that was used 2 or 3 times. So I almost went backwards as opposed, because I think what you said, like, new writers, they just think I need her to stab him. So she got a knife from the kitchen and she stabs him. And that's how you think when you write, you're just kind of additive. But then the idea is to kind of go backwards and like connect things. So sometimes that can be the way to do it. Sometimes when they pull the knife, you're like, well, what's something I can use that I used already? Sometimes that works.
It's the premise pretzel side of it.
Yeah, it can be either way, but a lot of times this looks better like when you're done a draft and you're looking at the big picture and you circle something that's new and you circle and you're like, you think, could I use that earlier? Could I do a thing? I was working with a co-writer just yesterday, and we had a story that there's a big location that happens in Act 3 that they need to find this new location and go to it. And she was like, why don't we just use the thing that we used in Act 1? There was a location that was similar and we could kind of remodify it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. You know, so it's always like just kind of as you go, like if you keep doing and thens and thens and thens, sometimes it could be, you could just look back and say, is there something from the beginning that I could use here? Could I reuse something? And it's always more fun if you can find those things.
Fold back on yourself. It feels more connected that way.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, we're not even talking about the coolness of the, you know, the premise pretzel nature of the fact that he's got to go now back to Tachibana and now rely on him.
Right.
In order to succeed. You know, it all comes back to that opening scene. That opening scene works in multiple ways. You know, it creates nightmares. There's definitely a premise pretzel that's built off of that opening scene where that's one setup, and there's just like endless payoffs that build off of that opening scene.
The opening scene is anything but a throwaway. We're with that opening scene for the rest of the movie.
Yep.
Right up until the end, until the lesson is learned. And
it's consequential in so many ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Touch tones and twitches.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Harry Potter book.
The last time we talked about this was the Holdovers episode.
Is this a William Martell?
It is.
Jargon?
It is.
Yes.
And I always, when I explain it, when I help clients, I have all the links that I can like speak to the links. I don't have all the links here to the actual articles so William, if you listen to this, I'm sorry if I get it wrong a little bit, but
I'm Facebook friends with him, so he sees the post probably.
So am I.
Yeah. He's a nice guy.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's great.
He's a great guy.
And his blue books are great tools for the craft if you've never read them and you're listening to this. So he has a concept that there's two versions of it, which is touchtone and twitch. And Jamie, correct me if I get some of the details of the differences between the two wrong, because that's where I always kind of have to
I'll be honest, I can't remember the specific jargon. So
because I always lean on the articles when I'm helping clients, and I use his words and say, this is where it came from and this is what it said. Do this. So it's basically that there are objects that the audience are introduced to help us associate something visual with the character's inner problem or some conflict they're going through. And every time those objects reappear in the story, they help us as an audience get an emotional barometer. That's how we measure how the character is feeling about this turmoil, right? We see them with the object, they're feeling something, and then we see them with the object again. Are they feeling something different? Are they getting better about this? Are they getting worse? The object is there to help us understand the inner workings of the character, and nothing needs to be said. You see the object, you see them look at the object, whatever they're doing, that's how they feel. And
it's like a photo in their wallet that they keep coming.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's many I don't have the list of the famous ones, but on the show. And so what it is the touchstones are the positive side of that, right? It's something they are thinking, they have a positive memory of that. Their inner turmoil might not be positive, but the object itself is a positive one. And the twitch is like something that's like conjuring negative emotions, right? So they're twitching every time they see it, right? I'm thinking
it's Eddie Valiant looking at pictures of him and his brother on vacation.
Absolutely,
in Roger Rabbit.
That's a perfect one.
Right?
That's perfect.
It's a beautiful memory, and it's also bringing up all the turmoil of his death.
Exactly, and we understand that without him saying anything,
right.
And that is the use of the technique.
Also, we need to do Roger Rabbit.
Yeah. But and oftentimes the object is used to track the progress of a broken relationship moving toward healing. So a couple examples we've done on the show are in the Mitchells versus the Machines. It's the wooden moose, Dad's favorite thing.
Yeah.
The story uses the wooden moose as what we come back to track how their relationship is growing and changing. In Black Widow, it's the American Pie tape to show how the song
I don't
itself,
even remember.
yeah. So there's an American Pie tape, and the song itself is how we track how the family is growing back together.
Yeah.
See, even MCU movies use this like crazy. Sometimes it's used to track the inner wound of a character progressing toward healing. So, like, quoting Jack Epps Jr., that I quoted earlier, it's Top Gun, it's Goose's dog tags that Maverick wears as a reminder of his guilt and shame for guilt for Goose's death. And when he throws them into the ocean, that's how we're shown that he's made his peace with this and he's able to move on and win the day, and the Holdovers, they had one for each character, which I love. The Holdovers, Angus had his old family Christmas card. Every time it was brought up, we were getting an emotional barometer of how Angus was feeling about all the stuff we know regarding his family drama. Mary, she has Curtis's dress uniform hanging in the closet. When we see that uniform, we're able to get an emotional barometer of how she's feeling about the death of her son. And she has the brown box that's filled with his baby mementos that she eventually passes off to her pregnant sister. So we're able to track that she's now healing from this loss and she's moving on. So this touchstone helps us track, okay, she's moving on. And Paul has his touchstone and Twitch, whatever you want to call it, is the headmaster's crystal bottle of Louis VIII's, it's alcohol, and it represents Paul's failure, shame, and imprisonment in the institution. And in the end, he steals the bottle from the headmaster, and he takes a swig of it, and he spits it onto the entrance, and as he's leaving the institution forever. And the bottle is how we track how Paul's growing and changing.
Right.
So these are they're so simple. And if you figure these out, you can kind of write these on their own as like sort of, this is how these are going to be my big moments of emotional growth could be coupled with the object that I picked for the touchstone.
I'm trying to think of how this applies to the photo in Back to the Future. Well, it's doing like three different jobs in that photo.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, how it's hearkening back to how it functions as just a touchstone.
It's a touchstone and also functioning as a plot device at the same time. Yeah,
and it's a ticking clock device.
Right,
it's a deadline on its own. It's literally an hourglass that's evaporating in front of our eyes. So
Back to the Future, what a miracle.
So Godzilla has 4. Godzilla -1 has 4.
Okay.
And that's why I love that this is, it's a universal storytelling device, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is, the first one is the big one, which is the photos of the dead island mechanics and their families that he carries around with them that literally has their blood on them, from the beach incident, and he carries it around with him, and that comes up a lot in the first half of the movie, and it continues to come up in the second half of the movie where he's talking about his trauma and his feelings. The second one is the shrine for his parents. So every time we return to that shrine, we understand how he's feeling about, like, do I deserve to survive? They wanted me to survive. Am I going to listen to their wishes and want to live? Or am I going to choose to sacrifice myself like my country has brainwashed me to? So every time we see that shrine of his parents in his house that he's made, we get an emotional barometer of that side of things. Then once he thinks Noriko's dead, he puts her photo onto that memorial shrine. And now we have an additional touchstone for Noriko and his relationship with her and the stakes. And every time she's brought up, and then eventually that photo, he puts it in the cockpit of the fighter. And during those big beats where we're building up to, is he going to make that choice? Is he going to do the kamikaze? We see the shot of the Noriko, and then we see his response. So
I don't know about you guys, but I was instantly transported to Randy Quaid in Independence Day, looking at his kids right before.
See, talk about premise with a new skin. It's still fucking awesome.
And
right?
Randy Quaid does kamikaze himself.
Yes, he does. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Up yours. Right. We're gonna do that one day. But see how that doesn't, no one cares. We don't care that was a premise with a new skin
No.
for that moment. Yeah. So then the last one is Akiko's family drawing that she draws for him. That is, it's almost additionally also putting a face on the stakes for him, even when he's not with her. And that becomes a touchstone for, for his feelings about whether he wants to survive or not. And that also shows up in the cockpit in the finale. So we have 4 examples of those in this movie, and they're really easy to learn from. If you want to learn this technique, this movie, you could just study those and it'll give you an idea of how to like use those in your own story for like emotional impact. Yeah.
Awesome. And last but not least, using POV to manipulate the audience or audience contract violations.
This is my favorite thing that the movie does.
Okay.
And I'm excited to talk about. So it's going to be to one reviewer, it's going to be the thing they hate, which is me talking a whole bunch. Before you guys get to chime in, I wish Jimmy wouldn't talk so much.
I mean, no offense to that guy, but it's a podcast. It's talking, and you're on it. So
it was my review actually.
Jamie just put a fake name.
Yeah. It's my burner.
You guys should totally fucking do that to me, by the way.
God, this seems so mean. All right, go ahead.
Jamie needs to stop talking just in general.
No.
Okay, so what is the audience contract? So we've talked about this on 2 episodes in particular, the Matrix episode, and I believe it came up again it came up again in Scream.
Okay.
So I'm going to give that Scream example, and it came up in Dungeons of Dragons. Had one of these and it worked. And I have a theory I want to pitch to you. I'll actually pitch it up front, Jamie, and then you can, after I read it, I'll see what you think. I'm starting to think since I'm noticing more of these, that it's kind of like the one coincidence rule, which, the one coincidence rule we've talked about in the past is when you're telling a drama, the audience will absorb really they'll buy into one really crazy coincidence. That's usually like the hook. And then after that, any other coincidence, the only time it's going to work is if it gets your character into more trouble. But if it gets your character out of trouble, the audience is going to hate it.
It doesn't apply to comedy, right?
It doesn't apply to comedies. Coincidence is really the source of comedy.
Right.
So I am starting to think that the audience will allow, like the arc plot Hollywood audience will allow one of these contract violations where the point of view is shifted unfairly and in a way that the movie hasn't treated for the entirety, for the sake of some dramatic twist reveal that we're like, oh shit, that's so cool. And so what I'm talking about here, and then I'll get back to it, is the parachute reveal. And that is what I consider an audience contract violation because we weren't shown that there was a parachute option. So even though the character knew it was an option, we did not know it was an option.
Shouldn't you call it the ejector seat?
Yeah, the ejector seat.
Right, okay.
The ejector seat.
Yeah.
So let me go back to explaining audience contract. And I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but we've only talked about.
I'm not trying to interrupt you, but the only reason I say that is because it is set up earlier in the movie that Japanese planes did not have ejector seats in it. So that was said to the audience. That was put in the air. It's not totally concrete, but it was put in the air.
No, it was planted, and even the twist was planted. He says one more thing, but we don't get to hear that.
Right.
And that's where it makes the shift, the POV shift that I'm talking about. Okay, so what? And again, I'm sorry, I've only talked about this 4 times ever, so I don't have the pull string. Just go. Basically, like in an arc plot cheeseburger story, you have a contract with your audience, which is we are going to be aligned with our hero at all times. When our hero learns something, we will learn it soon after, or either when they learn it or very soon after. And this extends to 4 different ways, which is if our character has an agenda, right? These no secret agenda movies, God, these scripts, I get endless scripts where the hero has a goal and an agenda, and the entire script, the whole point of the writer is to try to keep me into the dark about what my character is doing from scene to scene and why. They're going to the Burger King. Why are they going to Burger King? Oh, they were just hungry. Okay. Like it's just like one scene after another. Like I used recently the a character training and the whole movie is training, and then in the last scene we find out they were training for the Olympics, and the climax of the movie is the Olympics, but we were never told for 90 pages that they were an Olympic athlete in training. I read scripts like that all the time, and the writer is trying to give us that experience. They're like, no, I don't want you to know that they're an Olympic athlete, and like that's not how Hollywood movies work. So that's an example of an audience contract violation, because we don't know
They're treating the Olympics
is.
like Bruce Willis being dead in The Sixth Sense. Actually, I was training for the Olympics the whole time.
So that's a great explanation, right? The experience the writer is going for is they want to keep you in the dark about what the character is doing, because they think by the end we're going to be like, oh my God, they were fucking the whole Olympian the entire time. and you as an audience are like, what? Like, well, why didn't you just tell me that? Like from the start, I would have enjoyed this so much. I would have understood why I was watching them lift weights for 90 minutes.
You would have had a goal too. You would have understood the goal.
Right.
Was
all of the story DNA falls into place, but none of it can fall into place if you are disconnected from what the hero is doing and why. And so that's the audience contract. So awareness ambiguity, when your lead character is aware of something, the audience should be aware of what they're aware. Like if they see a threat across the room, you need to cut to that threat and show what the threat is. I can't tell you how many times I read in a script, they're like, holy shit, watch out for that. And like the writer doesn't want to show you what the hero is scared of. And it's like a T-Rex, but they don't want you to know that they're running from a T-Rex.
Well,
and so
CGI is expensive.
Right. We go 30 pages, and the entire time it's revealed they've been running from a T-Rex. And I'm like, well, just show me the T-Rex, and then I will be scared for them. So it's an awareness. They violated the audience awareness contract. And then it is emotional ambiguity. I read robot characters for the sake of robot characters, where literally the character is like, Jimmy looks at Bob, Jimmy looks at Jamie, and like a crazy thing will happen, and it'll be like, Jamie looks at Bob. And the thing is that that ambiguity. You're laughing.
I'm laughing because it's like, if that was in a script, it's pretty funny. It's just like
it. But the thing is, then I go like, well, what are they feeling right here? And they're like, I don't want you to know. And I'm like, no, that's not how the emotional experience of a Hollywood story works. If you're going for anti-plot, that's awesome. If you're going for vibes, that's awesome. But like in an arc plot story, which this is pretty much telling, you need to know what the character is feeling. And you can maybe keep us in the dark about why they're feeling what they're feeling and reveal that later depending on the storytelling, but we have to know what they're feeling. And I read scripts all the time that are ambiguous about the emotional experience of the character on purpose for the entire script. So like Jimmy looks in the mirror, and that's all they say. Like, well, how are they looking at like Jimmy like wins the lottery, and then they're like, Jimmy looks at the ticket. And like I'm telling you, I read scripts all the time like that, and they're like, no, I don't want you to know how this guy feels about winning the lottery until the end. And I'm like, no, that is a violation of the audience emotional contract with the audience. So then
is that even how humans react? I mean, like, that's not.
Dude, I cannot tell you. This is so common, dude, and that's why I want to talk about it. So because in the wrong hands, in the wrong wielding of this, you're instantly going to get a no from the reader,
right?
And I want everyone to get a recommend. And if you can't get a recommend if you're constantly keeping us in the dark about these things. So a couple famous examples I'll give, which is The Matrix. Trinity is brought into the room by the Oracle, and she's told a secret. We don't get to see that secret. The reason that's not an audience contract violation is because Trinity is not our perspective character for the story. If Neo gets taken into the room and the Oracle tells him a secret off screen, and we're not oriented about what that secret is, that's an audience contract violation. You have to tell the audience what Neo just learned from the Oracle, because he's our perspective into this story. And what I read all the time is the opposite of that. I'll be watching. I'll be with a character, and they are going to propose to their love of their life, and they got the ring, and they go on the date. And the date happens, the proposal happens, but we don't see it. And then the next scene happens and they're emotional, but we don't know why, because they violated the off-screen. They didn't show us the proposal or what the person said, whether they said yes or no. So I don't know how to feel about the outcome. Right. And I read this all the time, and that is an audience contract violation. And the thing is, the writer is doing this on purpose. That's what they want. They want me to go like, did she say yes? Did she say no? What did she say? Like, and that's just not how stories work when it's your hero. And so and Scream is another example. Scream does one in the climax, and it works. And we figured out it was because it was the right time and the right place for it, which is the entire time we're following the story with Sydney. And in the climax of the house, Sydney disappears. We don't know where she is, what she's doing. Now, all of a sudden, the lead characters are Stu and what's the other guy name? I can't remember. And the killers have become our main perspective character. And that's a shift in POV that the entire movie has not done for us. And so all of a sudden, Sydney jumps out of the closet, and we didn't know she was in the closet.
Right.
And she gets them, and it works. And it's super emotionally satisfying. When we talked it through, we figured out it was kind of because it felt like the right place, right time to make that happen, where it would be emotionally satisfying. And if you had done that sooner, it wouldn't be. And so the parachute thing, I think, is a version of that, right? Like we didn't know that there was an ejection seat. And so like when it's revealed, I think it works, but it is like typically, and for the rest of the movie with him, we have learned everything that our main character has learned up to this point. We've never been disconnected from him, you know? And so
it was the right time to deceive us.
I think so. I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jamie, after I've just fucking gone on a tangent and
You know what's funny? I was spending this time, as you were saying it, trying to figure out, there was a label for this. When I used to do video game programming, there was a label for this, and it was like asymmetric information or something like that was the term. And it's a big thing in video games, dissonance. And I think there's even a dissonance term for this. And essentially in video games, you can imagine if you as the player are not aligned with the character you're playing, it's a problem. So if, let's say you want to do A, but the game is driving your character to do B, but you're supposed to be the character, that's the problem. And this kind of works like that, right?
Yes. It's exactly what I'm
right.
It's the same idea. So I was sitting here, I was like, it's been many years since I wrote a video game, but I remember studying the art of writing a video game, and there's lots of terms like that. And I couldn't quite find it. So again, if our listeners know these terms, message them to me, because I kind of want to like use it. I might use it in the future or read about it a little bit. Because I'm not sure, because I know there's a term out there specifically for it, and I just want to know it. That said, so bring it back to this movie. It would have, as a writer of this movie, that flashback would have driven me nuts. And honestly, I don't have an answer for it, because it's the right answer. They made the right choice.
They did make the right choice. I am agreeing with you.
You don't want to set that up beforehand, because we'll all know, oh, he's just going to parachute out.
He's going to parachute.
So they made the right choice, but I can't tell you how many times I get writers that I work with on a script consulting basis where they want to do flashbacks like that on a knee-jerk basis always. And it's like, I call it the Sixth Sense curse or something, where they're constantly wanting to flash back to little moments that we don't really need. And there's a part of me that feels like that scene would be better without the flashback. Like this, just see his parachute and be like, oh, he parachuted. But because the Japanese, maybe if you didn't set up that they had ejector seats or something, I don't know. Maybe that he had an American plane and it had an ejector seat. That if I was writing that story, that little part would make me crazy. I would be trying to fix that till the edit. Like we'd be in the editing room and I'd be like, isn't there a way we could take that flashback out and do this and do that? And honestly, I think it's the right answer in this case. Like I do, and it shows why even things that drive us nuts and are the most elegant sometimes are the wrong answer.
Exactly.
For emotional impact and things like that.
I take it as humbling, like, oh shit, like I don't know what I'm talking about, like, because this was awesome. And I loved it. And I would, if somebody came across if a script came across my desk trying to do this, a lesser script, I would have been like, nah, you want to. You don't want to. No.
Well, yeah, but changing it would make it worse, right?
Like, it would make it worse.
Yeah.
I'm
just saying, if you got the version where they tell us that he had the ejector seat in,
then the emotion goes away.
Right, but
we already
would
know.
you have caught that? Would you have said that? That's what I mean. I guess that's what I'm challenging.
Situational to another script, because with this, I think it's the right move.
I feel like there's a version of this where you do one of those secret weapon style setups that sets up the ejector seat with on a joke or something or some different way, and then the ejector seat. I don't know what that is. I'm not smart enough to know.
You could have.
I would have driven myself crazy trying to figure it out.
There's a version where Tachibana installs the ejector seat and leaves some type of clue that it's available in the cockpit. So in the moment,
some relationship handshake,
something, or
that he connects,
right,
with
and then
figures out. Oh yeah,
and then Shikishima realizes it right before he goes into Godzilla's mouth.
Ultimately, I think, Bob, you answered it earlier, which is the reason it works is because we get to see that the mechanic learned the lesson.
Yes,
and that's what led to this survival.
Good
and
point.
So we get both of these characters that are like showing us the communal learning of what thematic lesson,
the importance of life.
And if you take that flashback away, like if you put it too soon, then we don't get that moment of like synchronatic learning of the lesson, and it all just like works together like harmoniously to show us how everybody has grown from this experience.
Tachibana has to be a character in this story from the beginning for this to work.
That's a good point.
The problem I have with it is it reeks of Deus Ex Machina. It reeks of like bad serials from the 30s where they would like put somebody in jeopardy, and then they do something that really didn't exist as a cheat to get out of it. It feels like one of those things. I do not have an answer to make it better.
But the execution of it is fucking fantastic, is what I'm saying.
It's the best emotional.
It defies logic from a screen.
Right.
I think.
Right. It's
from a screenwriting logic.
And that's what I mean. It would drive me nuts. This little beat would drive me nuts to the bitter end. And I'd watch it. If I was the writer of it, I'd watch it to this day and say, never figured out that flashback. But honestly, it's probably because it's the best thing you could have done in this. In this scenario.
It was the right call.
Yeah, but I don't know. The difficult part for me, I don't know if this is what you're saying, Jamie, but it's like, why wouldn't Shikishima just tell everyone?
Right. Yeah.
Why is it a secret? Why does it feel like he's surprising her? Hey, I didn't kill myself. It kind of feels like that a little bit, right? Like, I got you.
Well, because I think they're trying to convey that he still hadn't made up his mind
a little bit,
until that moment, right?
Yeah.
It was like, I mean, they really dramatize. I almost put it as the last talking point. The whole movie is building to whether he's gonna like do the kamikaze.
Maybe that's the
right?
answer. Maybe that's the answer Jamie's looking for. Maybe it's we see that flashback scene happens in real time instead of a flashback, and then much like Independence Day, you have him wrestling with his own, do I deserve death
Is
or
he
do I
going to
deserve
do
life?
it? Is he not going to do it?
You could do
And
something
it's more
like that.
emotional.
It's more of an emotional decision.
Yeah, than manipulative.
Not trying to
of the
fix the
audience.
movie. It's just
no, the movie doesn't need to be fixed.
It doesn't need it all. But I was just trying to answer Jamie's quandary, pretty much.
I loved when I noticed it. I was like, oh, this is like the most complex thing to talk about. Because it's so not how Americans tell stories or absorb stories, engage with stories. So
I think that there is a version that's still effective with him making the decision in the cockpit. Like Independence Day, and they re-edited Independence Day to make that happen. You know that wasn't originally.
I didn't know that.
Originally, that's not how Independence Day ended, and it was all reshot and everything. And it was him. I remember the director saying we wanted to see Randy Quaid visually make the decision to sacrifice himself, save the whole scene.
It was the right call.
It's the right call. So that could maybe work here, but doesn't need to be fixed. So you know, who cares what we see?
So is there a what have we learned from the audience contract side of things that we could like figure out here? Because I don't have the answers, and that's why I'm trying to figure it out.
If you're gonna break it once only, and really it has to be for like
earn the shit.
You have
out
to
of
earn
it.
Yeah.
Make it have a purpose beyond just gotcha.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what I
unless
usually
it's a comedy.
reading.
If it's a comedy and you do an got you for a laugh, it might actually be great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Sorry, Jamie, I cut you off.
No. I think this is kind of a special case. I think tread lightly in this direction. I think that's,
proceed with caution with the audience contract violation.
Yeah, and every rule is made to be broken. Everything can work. Just be
always
cautious.
Exceptions.
Yeah.
Just
know why we're struggling with it. And then if you know why we're struggling with it and you still love it and you still think it's the right answer, then do it. That's always my thing. As long as you're informed, do whatever you want.
I think all three of us would agree that reading something like that on paper, you might have a react. Like Jimmy, if you were given this script, you might have a reaction like you're violating the audience contract, but then seeing it executed is a totally different experience. You know,
So you're absolutely right. Whenever I see flashback to 5 days earlier in like the middle of an action sequence or something, I'm like, I just groan. I'm like, oh no.
Are we going backwards?
Yeah, but
it
doesn't feel quite that way when you actually see it.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to say, plug, end with?
I want to say, if you have any questions, send them to writersblockbusterspodcast.com or writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com. And we're going to do the next one we're going to do is the questions episode we've been talking about. We got enough, but if you want to get yours in,
now's the time.
Just because you ask a question doesn't mean it's going to be in that episode.
Right. And
we might
save it. Honestly, there's some we're saving for relevant future episodes we have planned, things like that. So we try to bring them up when it's relevant. But then including Jamie, that video game term that you're talking about, the dissonance, or if someone knows what that term is, please give me the code, give me the term. I want to learn more about it and its history and what other people have said about it. So
right. It's just the type of thing that really comes up in video games because you're playing a character. You are the character, so it's really important. I do have one thing to plug. The Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook, they turned it into a digital experience. You can buy a digital version of it. So it used to be, it's like a journal, and a lot of people are just digital only. They don't want to break out a pen or anything like that. Their hand cramps up. You know what I mean? So they did put a lot of work into this. They turned the book into a digital book, so to speak. And you can find the brand new, it literally just came out today, book at savethecat.com. You can buy it there. It does cost. I think the price is about the same as the book. So, and it really is for each book you buy. It's kind of the exact same. It's a 1-to-1. It's like for each book you buy, I think you get one story out of it. So then you'd have to buy a second book to get a second story, or you'd have to go back and erase all the things you put or something like that. But they did a really good job of translating the book to digital. A lot of people wanted it. If you were one of those people, if you're interested, go check it out at savethecat.com.
Awesome. I think that's everything, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.